Welcome to the layer-by-layer overview of Psalms 9 and 10. Tradition has been divided over whether to treat this as one psalm or two, because they provide such very different perspectives on the wicked. See our exegetical issues video on why we combine them. When rightly understood, both agree that the wicked cannot overcome the Lord, who is a refuge for the oppressed. The larger poem, often broken into two psalms, is an alphabetic acrostic that suffers disruption. That disruption is a powerful poetic means of expressing the message. The alphabet thus provides one way of tracking the sequence of the psalms, but the structure is more intricate. See our Poetic Features video for the role of the acrostic. The first portion, Psalm 9, has two well-defined sections. The first, Praise of the King, and the second, Petition to the King. This contrasts with the second portion, Psalm 10, which, up to verse 11, is a somewhat chaotic description of the wicked and his ways, which we've called persecution of the poor. From verse 12 to the end is a double petition for God to take action, each followed by a proclamation of the King, a declaration of confidence that the Lord hears and will bring justice. The psalm begins, for the director, according to Muth-Labbain, a psalm by David. No one knows what Muth-Labbain means, but the rest of the superscription reminds us that this is a royal psalm, insofar as it was written by David, and it was intended for temple worship as headed up by the music director. Verse 2 begins with the first section of recollection, recalling all that the Lord has already done for his people. I will praise the Lord with all my heart. I will tell about all your wonderful works. This first perspective on the wicked starts with praise, because the problem of the wicked belongs within a much larger context of the Lord's character as righteous and just, and his historical record of bringing justice. His justice rightfully brings forth praise. This means that the starting point, even for addressing the wicked, is praising the Lord and recounting his works that demonstrate his justice. The wonderful works here refer to the same often found in the signs and wonders that God used to bring his people out of Egypt. They are wonders, wondrous works that no man could perform, and that reveal the power of the Lord himself. I will rejoice and exult because of you. I will sing praise to your name, Most High. There may be a correlation between how many lines of praise open a psalm and the overall length of the psalm. Verse 3 is very similar to verse 2, reflecting that the activity of praise is accompanied by rejoicing and exultation. The natural manifestation of this is singing, which, like the psalm itself, is in recognition of the character and person of the Most High, which is a metaphor for one who is perfectly just, above all corruption. The Most High begins to set up the contrast between the one who is just and righteous and those who are not just or righteous. When the audience hears the combination of wonderful works and singing praise to your name, they would be prompted to wonder just which works have given God a reputation worthy of this praise. They could likely supply plenty of their own, but this is also a hint that the song is preparing for a specific focus. When my enemies turn back, they stumble and perish because of your presence, because you have accomplished my right and my claim, because you have sat on a throne as a righteous judge. The content of the praise now comes. When the psalmist's enemies turn back, he knows that they will stumble and perish, because the Lord's presence makes it so. The Lord's presence makes it so because he has accomplished the psalmist's right and claim, establishing him as the innocent party. If the Lord had sat on a throne as a righteous judge, it means a legal case came before him, he presided over a court as judge, and he executed justice. When understood as from the pen of David, one may recall that the Lord has shown David to be a legitimate king who stands in the Lord's favor, receiving his help in battle and other occasions. We know that David's right to the throne was long contested by Saul and his Benjaminite followers, and eventually even by his own son. One's right to a throne was never secure in the ancient world without constantly reasserting oneself. But here, David may be relying not on his own military and political prowess, but on the Lord to secure his right and claim. There's no indication that such an example is the only interpretation, however. The Lord brings justice to his people, establishing them in the right, with no further limitations provided. You rebuked nations. You destroyed the wicked. You blotted out their name forever and ever. The Israelites fought many nations: the Canaanites, Philistines, Amalekites, Arameans, Edomites, Moabites, to name a few. The expectation in the ancient world, when a leader was defeated, was that his entire family be destroyed, lest a blood feud arise and threaten the new leader. In all their victories, many kings and leaders were likely destroyed, with their families and thus their name blotted out forever and ever. The enemy came to an end in ruins forever, and you uprooted their cities. The very memory of them perished. The psalmist is going to extreme lengths to insist that past enemies were thoroughly destroyed with no ongoing memory. The language is strong, which should be noted. The psalm is building up a picture of enemies in which their end is always the same: destruction with all memory erased. In the ancient world, immortality was achieved through one's ongoing lineage. To have all memory of one's line erased was considered a curse. That is the fate the psalmist claims belongs to the wicked. But the Lord will sit enthroned forever. He has established his throne for justice, and he will judge the world with righteousness. He will execute justice for the peoples with fairness. Every other line begins with but or and, reflecting that this is the strophe for the Hebrew letter vav, which is the conjunction. It provides the direct contrast to the enemies whose memory perishes. The Lord is enthroned forever, never threatened by any enemies. He established his throne with justice by the very destruction of his enemies, and he will continue to judge the world with righteousness, executing justice with the highest standards of fairness. In light of the entire poem, we're able to read this in response to the implicit question: is the Lord really fair? Really just? The enemies will appear in a much more threatening guise later on, and the psalm is first building the case that the Lord's throne is secure, and it is secure precisely because he executes justice. He does not leave the enemy unpunished. And may the Lord be a refuge for the oppressed, a refuge in distressing times. And may those who know your name put their trust in you, because you have not abandoned those who seek you, Lord. There are consequences to the Lord being securely on the throne, executing justice. The oppressed should be fleeing to him for refuge. To take refuge in the Lord is here a metaphor meaning to depend on him for one's vindication. Enemies endangering a person was not a purely physical risk, but aligned with a spiritual risk, which was understood to be based on one's relationship with the deity. When suffering, a person standing with his God would potentially be called into question. The psalmist here says, when suffering or oppressed, instead of doubting one's standing with the Lord, people need to depend on the Lord for deliverance. There is no room for doubt in those who know your name. Their job is simply to put their trust in you. Any who know his name and put their trust in him will not be abandoned. In the previous strophe, the Lord did not leave the enemy unpunished. The corollary here is that he does not abandon his own people. Sing praise to the Lord who sits enthroned in Zion. Tell about his deeds among the peoples, because the one who requires a reckoning for bloodshed has remembered them. He has not ignored the outcry of the afflicted. These themes all come together in the next section, Petition to the King. God has executed justice among his peoples, and those great deeds call forth praise to the one who performed them. There has been bloodshed, and there have been poor, but the Lord has required a reckoning for the bloodshed, and he has responded to the cry of the poor. To sing praise is not to deny either of those realities, but to celebrate that those realities are just the beginning of the story, not the end. Suffering is the prompt for God's great deeds, and God can be relied upon to perform such deeds. The right response is to praise him. This praise echoes the opening praise in verse 2, indicating that we've now started the second part of Psalm 9. The established character of the Lord and how he dealt with enemies in the past is a pattern which informs how he will deal with additional enemies in the future. Have mercy on me, Lord. See my affliction from those who hate me, you who lift my head from the gates of death, so that I may tell about all your praiseworthy actions at the gates of daughter Zion, and so that I may be glad because of your salvation. The previous verse said the Lord has not ignored the outcry of the poor. Here, in miniature, we see what that looks like. These verses provide a tour de force in which a petition for mercy becomes cause for rejoicing. It provides a snapshot of the psalm. Trials and tribulations need to be placed within the context of providing an opportunity for the Lord to rescue his people and perform great deeds, which becomes the basis for praise and rejoicing. Nations sank in a pit which they had made. Their foot was caught in a net which they had hidden. The Lord, who has accomplished justice, has made himself known, ensnaring the wicked by the work of his hands. Higayon Selah. The previous strophe was what God's justice looked like from the perspective of the poor. This strophe paints a summary of God's justice from the perspective of the wicked. In one image, the enemy nations made a pit to trap God's people. In another, they set a trap to capture God's people. In both cases, their intended violence came back on their heads, and in this way, the Lord made himself and his justice known. That is, when the wicked could pursue their wickedness and then fall prey to their own wickedness, that is one way the Lord makes himself known. The continuing theme is that the Lord's justice is enough. It's fully adequate to handling the problem of the wicked. And indeed, the very presence of the wicked provides an opportunity to display the Lord's justice. The wicked will return to Sheol, all nations that ignore God, for the poor will not be ignored forever. The hope of the afflicted will not perish forever. This may be best heard against the backdrop of laments crying out, "How long must all this suffering continue? The wicked succeed, and the poor and afflicted suffer?" The answer is definitive: not forever. The wicked will go where they belong, and the poor and needy will receive the Lord's attention as the beginning of bringing justice and setting things to right. Rise up, Lord! Let humanity not prevail. Let nations be judged in your presence. Lord, put a fearful thing among them. Let the nations know they are human. Selah. The result of all this understanding and confidence is not to be a passive spectator, but to openly align with the Lord, verbally joining with the Lord's ways as his representative to Israel, remembering that the king was to represent the Lord to the people. The word for humanity here may be a disparaging term, appropriate for the arrogant who disregard the limits God set on humanity. This combines the idea of enemy nations and enemy individuals, both enemies because they set themselves against the Lord's king. David's request is not for their destruction, but for their failure to achieve their own ends. This is a pivot in which the justice sought is for the Lord to put fear in the nations, that they might know their limitations. This prepares for the content of Psalm 10, in which the wicked one, in his own arrogance, has convinced himself that he can oppress God's people without consequence. Lord, why do you stand at a distance? Why do you hide your eyes during troubling times? Confidence gives way to frustration and fear, which helps explain why so many have split Psalms 9 and 10 into two separate psalms. See our Poetic Features video to explain how the alphabetic acrostic ties these together and explains this. Here, we begin the new section, Persecution of the Poor. The contrast between the hope and praise of the first half of this poem and now the second half is strong. In the first half, multiple times, the psalmist delights in the fact that the nations are held accountable and the Lord does not ignore the outcry of the poor. This becomes a test of that claim. How does one account for times when the Lord does seem to be ignoring the outcry of the poor? How does one understand times when the Lord seems to hide his eyes, taking no interest in suffering? The wicked pursue the afflicted, prompted by pride. May they be caught in the plans that they have devised. For the wicked has boasted about his soul's cravings, and whoever has blessed the one who works for unjust gain has treated the Lord with contempt. In a way that suits his pride, the wicked does not seek. All his plans are, there is no God. His ways persist every time. Your rulings are far away from him, on high. All his foes, he jeers at them. He has said to himself, throughout all generations in which there is no trouble, I will not be shaken. This is one long, somewhat chaotic description of the pride of the wicked, how it prompts them to pursue the afflicted, to boast about their wickedness, to reject any worship of God. He jeers at his enemies and proclaims his own permanent security. If unjust gain is part of what unites this section, presumably pride and financial gain have driven this character to afflict others and boast not only of his affliction and success, but also that there is no danger of God intervening. There is no God means that God will not interfere with his plans, and all the rulings of God that call for justice are out of his sight. He is confident that he is secure. This must all be understood within the context of the first half of the poem, Psalm 9. In 921, the explicit request was that the wicked know that they are only human, and that they have some fear, as in fear of God, put in them. Instead of God's justice persisting every time, here it is the wicked's ways that persist every time. Instead of the psalmist praising God's mighty works, here it is the wicked boasting about his own mighty works of unjust gain. The contrast is intended and constitutes the heart of this psalm. Is the wicked right? Is he successfully pursuing his wickedness, secure from all fear of judgment? Is he right that justice will never come? His mouth is full of curses, deceit, and oppression. Hardship and destruction are underneath his tongue. He sits in villages' ambush places. He murders the innocent in the hiding places. His eyes spy for the wretch. He lurks in the hiding place like a lion in its den. He lurks in order to seize the afflicted. He seizes the afflicted by drawing his net across. He stoops, he crouches, and the wretches fall by his powerful claws. He has said to himself, God has been ignoring. He's been hiding his face. He has never noticed. In this second half of the description of the wicked, we find a blend of many images. First, the mouth of the wicked is the container for all the wickedness, reflecting the power of his words to effect his guilt. It might be that the forms of wickedness taste good to him, as in Job 20:12. Then, the wicked is an outlaw, knowing where ambushes are successful and making the most of them in order to murder the innocent. The wickedness is entirely premeditated and carefully planned out, with every intention of killing the wretch. Next, the images of lion and hunter-trapper blend together. The wicked lurks like a lion, willing to wait as long as necessary in order to seize his prey. Like a trapper, he spreads out his net to catch the victim. But then, like a lion, he stoops, crouches, understood, springs, and brings down the wretch with his powerful claws. The motivation for these intricate plans of ambush and murder is past success, which he convinced himself is a guarantee of the future. God hasn't interfered in the past, which surely means he has been ignoring and no longer cares. The plans therefore begin in his mouth, but quickly take shape in many forms, like outlaw, lion, and hunter. How does this lengthy description of the wicked, seeming to succeed in all his plans, fit in with the wider psalm? How can we reconcile the praise of the Lord's justice with the outright defiance and seeming success of the wicked? The Hebrew poem answers this, not by trying to harmonize or explain away the wicked. Instead, it places the truth about the wicked within the larger truth of God's justice over time. At any given moment, the wicked may be succeeding in his plans, but what is guaranteed is that another moment will come. Rise up, Lord. Lift up your hand, God. Do not ignore the afflicted. This echoes 9:20, pulling this second perspective of the wicked into the larger picture of the first, and beginning the final section, proclamation of the King. This is how the psalmist, who believes in God's justice, responds to injustice, calling on the Lord to take action exactly as he promised he would, calling on God to intervene on behalf of the afflicted, those whose oppression God promised would not last forever. This first verse applies the understanding of the first half of the poem, Psalm 9, and insists that it still applies to this description in which the wicked person seems to succeed. In effect, show yourself, Lord, to be everything we just sang about. Why has the wicked treated God with contempt? He has said to himself, "You will not require a reckoning." The conflict grows heated here with the explicit acknowledgement that the wicked person has treated God with contempt in claiming that he is not just and will not pursue justice for the wicked. In 9:13, the Lord was praised because he does require a reckoning for bloodshed. In the recent description of the wicked, bloodshed happened with no visible reckoning at all. The conclusion of the wicked was that somehow justice would never come for him, and he could oppress without fear. It would be all too easy for the oppressed to come to the same conclusion. This psalm seems intended to counteract that despair of the wicked seeming to succeed. You have noticed, for you see hardship and grief, in order to place them into your care. The wretch leaves them with you. You have been one who helps the fatherless. This is the answer to the claim of the wicked, the claim that God has been ignoring hardship and grief, letting the wicked get away with his wickedness. Not only does God see, but he looks on suffering and oppression in order to take care of those who are oppressed. The wretch does not need to worry or chafe, but can confidently leave all concern in the Lord's care. The person who would read 10:2-11 and lose all hope of God's intervening needs this other perspective, in which even that horrible list of wickedness can be left in God's hands for him to take care of. God is the just judge, which means he can be relied on to address injustice. This is the longest verse of the poem by far, which draws attention to it. If there were one verse to summarize the message for the person afflicted and wondering if God really cares, this is the verse. Break the arm of the one who is wicked and evil. May it seek its wickedness, but not find it. Hebrew poetry loves to be iconic, meaning the wording itself reflects the message. The very sound of the arm of the one who is wicked and evil sounds almost like chopping, as if the words themselves were cutting evil into pieces. This is the last instance of the word wicked or wickedness in the psalm, giving an audible picture for hearers and a visual picture for readers of wickedness being ended. Because God cares about the oppression of the wicked, the role of his king is to respond to oppression by calling on God to bring the injustice to an end. The Lord was praised at the very beginning of the poem for wiping out entirely even the memory of past wickedness. When new wickedness arises, it is the king's job to respond accordingly, invoking the Lord to once again break the arm of the one who is wicked and evil. The Lord is king forever. Nations perished from his land. The term wicked is now gone, but the nations introduced at the beginning of Psalm 9 should be addressed again. Are they in the same category as the wicked? Again, the answer in Hebrew poetry is rarely a wordy explanation, but rather placing images and claims side by side. The Lord is king forever means that his authority and exercise of justice are forever. They're not limited, whether by rebellious nations, or by disinterest, or by growing tired of his people. This consequence of the Lord's kingship is that not only will wickedness be eliminated, but already nations have perished. The historical proof that the Lord is just, and providing confidence that his justice will continue. See the poetic features for how the acrostic disruptions are resolved through mentions of the Lord's kingship. You have heard the desires of the afflicted, Lord. You make their hearts confident. You make your ear attentive, in order to execute justice for the fatherless and the oppressed, so that an earthly mortal will never terrify again. We can now see what seems to have been the premise of the psalm, an experience of wickedness that led to questioning whether the Lord really does hear the desires of the afflicted, or whether wicked men, earthly mortals, will have license to terrify for as long as they like. The first perspective was that of foregrounding the Lord's justice, which made enemies and wicked nations a matter of history, already destroyed and wiped out. The second perspective was of living through ongoing wickedness that had not yet been judged by the Lord. Here is the reconciliation. Even ongoing wickedness and cries and desires of the afflicted are heard by the Lord. Even before he takes final action against the wicked, he makes their hearts confident, often spoken of as giving them peace. What looks like inactivity is not inattention. The attention he does give is for one purpose: to execute justice, with special attention to the weakest, the fatherless and oppressed. That justice entails that any mortal, once judged, will never again terrify. God's judgment is final. That is how this psalm closes. Yes, there is wickedness ongoing. No, that wickedness will not last forever. The Lord sees and hears, and he is just. He will execute justice, and the wicked will be brought to an end. And now, Psalms 9 and 10 in their entirety. For the director, according to Muth Labbain, a psalm by David. I will praise the Lord with all my heart. I will tell about all your wonderful works. I will rejoice and exult because of you. I will sing praise to your name, Most High. When my enemies turn back, they stumble and perish because of your presence, because you have accomplished my right and my claim. You have sat on a throne as a righteous judge. You rebuked nations. You destroyed the wicked. You blotted out their name forever and ever. The enemy came to an end, in ruins forever, and you uprooted cities. The very memory of them perished. But the Lord will sit enthroned forever. He has established his throne for justice, and he will judge the world with righteousness. He will execute justice for the peoples with fairness. And may the Lord be a refuge for the oppressed, a refuge in distressing times. And may those who know your name put their trust in you, because you have not abandoned those who seek you, Lord. Sing praise to the Lord who sits enthroned in Zion. Tell about his deeds among the peoples, because the one who requires a reckoning for bloodshed has remembered them. He has not ignored the outcry of the afflicted. Have mercy on me, Lord. See my affliction from those who hate me, you who lift my head from the gates of death, so that I may tell about all your praiseworthy actions at the gates of daughter Zion, and so that I may be glad because of your salvation. Nations sank in a pit which they had made, and their foot was caught in a net which they had hidden. The Lord, who has accomplished justice, has made himself known, ensnaring the wicked by the work of his hands. Higayon Selah. The wicked will return to Sheol, all nations that ignore God. For the poor will not be ignored forever. The hope of the afflicted will not perish forever. Rise up, Lord. Let humanity not prevail. Let nations be judged in your presence. Lord, put a fearful thing among them. Let the nations know they are human. Selah. Lord, why do you stand at a distance? Why do you hide your eyes during troubling times? The wicked pursue the afflicted in pride. May they be caught in the plans that they have devised. For the wicked has boasted about his soul's cravings. Whoever has blessed the one who works for unjust gain has treated the Lord with contempt. In a way that suits his pride, the wicked does not seek. All his plans are, there is no God. His ways persist every time. Your rulings are far away from him, on high. All his foes, he jeers at them. He has said to himself, throughout all generations in which there is no trouble, I will not be shaken. His mouth is full of curses, deceit, and oppression. Hardship and destruction are underneath his tongue. He sits in villages' ambush places. He murders the innocent in the hiding places. His eyes spy for the wretch. He lurks in the hiding place like a lion in its den. He lurks in order to seize the afflicted. He seizes the afflicted by drawing his net across. He stoops, he crouches, and the wretches fall by his powerful claws. He has said to himself, God has been ignoring. He has been hiding his face. He has never noticed. Rise up, Lord! Lift up your hand, O God! Do not ignore the afflicted. Why has the wicked treated God with contempt? He has said to himself, "You will not require a reckoning." You have noticed, for you see hardship and grief in order to place them into your care. The wretch leaves them with you. You have been one who helps the fatherless. Break the arm of the one who is wicked and evil. May it seek its wickedness, but not find it. The Lord is king forever. Nations perished from his land. You have heard the desires of the afflicted, Lord. You make their hearts confident. You make your ear attentive, in order to execute justice for the fatherless and the oppressed, so that an earthly mortal will never terrify again. This has been the overview video for Psalms 9 and 10, which we understand to form one poem. Our aim is to present a single coherent interpretation of the poem. Our exegetical issues video discusses other scholarly views, and our poetic features video explores the distinctively poetic nature of the psalm. All these videos are offered free of charge, thanks to the generosity of our donors. Please visit us at cdbr.org to learn more. Thank you.